Hello. Good evening, everyone. Well, it has reached the golden hour. And for those that are joining us tonight, and I'm glad you're enjoying all these various Pastor Tony has brought. So I'm going to let you guys return to your seats. And so I'm glad that each of you are here, and I know there'll be other people showing up. You know, when you're, I guess, retired military, everything starts on time and ends on time. How's that, you guys? That's the way it is. It's punctuality, because you guys showed up on time, and so we start, and then there'll be other people be joining us. For those that are, is anybody new tonight for the first night? Anybody new? I know there's 2 or 3 people that are new, so I'm glad that you guys have joined us. And what I wanted to do, if you know of anybody else that's interested in coming or attending this thing, here is a brochure. So we meet again Tuesday night. We take a break tomorrow night, but we meet Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for this portion of the little seminar. So again, I just want to say thank you for attending. Again, if you need a restroom or anything like that, the restrooms are right on this side of the building. And if you want to stay at the end, there's some food at the end as well. For those that don't know, remember my name, Pastor Scott again, one of the pastors here. And so we're glad that you are with us tonight. And Pastor Tony, we're glad you're with us today too. He went on a little journey today. Where'd you go, to Point Defiance? Is that where it was? You tried, okay. That's all right. Hey, no, we won't go into details. So anyway, he likes hiking, and as you heard stories last night, he likes to hike. And I don't know if you were a runner in your day or not, but anyway, I'm glad that he's got a little fresh air today. So hey, before we begin again, and again, if you want an outline, I do have outlines. If you're going to read them, I just, you know, sometimes you just collect paper and you collect paper and you collect paper. You don't read the stuff. So I have outlines if you want to read it. So, and some of you picked it up last night, and so I'm glad for that. So why don't we have a word of prayer, and then we'll begin our study tonight. Loving Father, I just want to thank you for each person that's here. And here it's the remnant of the remnant tonight, and sometimes you worry about different things that take place in the community, and this is your time, and I thank you for bringing Tony across the country to be with us for this week, and I just look forward to the blessings that you have in store for us. And as he mentioned, these historical landmarks where it tells your story of what things happened anciently to back up the authority of the Scripture, and the blessings to remember and recall all the wonderful things that you've done. And we look forward to the day when you come again, and I just ask you to bless our meeting tonight, be with those that are still in the process of arriving. We love you in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Okay, we're going to do the drawing at the end. At the end. And the reason I'm doing that, and the only reason I'm doing that is because I know that there's other people that attended last night, and
those who are here are going to feel bad about that.
So you think we should do it right? Okay, maybe another night we'll do it. We'll do it for the first time. Anyway, I just thought there'd be more people that would. Okay, very good. Anyway, welcome again.
I'll try and put it in my front pocket. So there we go. I'll try and put it in my front pocket so maybe we don't drop it out. How are you this evening? A lovely day, a little bit of rain. We had 1.5 inches of rain in my house in Chino Hills in LA on Tuesday. We were doing a remodel, and I had taken out a window thinking it wouldn't rain until December or January, and 1.5 inches of rain, so we had leaks, and anyway, won't get into all that. Anyway, it's so good to see you. I know some of you got to look at some of the items that we have on the table in both places, and as I said, we'll be pulling out new things every night. And if my friend Annie brings some clay Tuesday, we're actually going to roll. She helped me set up some of my stuff. Now that I pointed her out in front of everyone, we'll actually roll the seal and see what the seal looks like. How about that? That'll be kind of cool, I think. So anyway, we also lit a light here, and there's a lot of other ambient light in. It's just some olive oil that they had over in the kitchen. And in the Jewish times, they would often use in the temple, they would use the undergarments of the priests. So I didn't have a wick, so you know what I did? I asked the lady, do you have any old underwear here? And they had an old t-shirt, so I cut that, I'm using that for a wick. So it may not burn quite as good because I'm hoping it's cotton, it might be polyester. Cotton burns a lot better, but they actually did that. It's very interesting what they would do with the oil press. I'll tell you something I got to be careful telling stories. But I started. Gethsemane, any idea what Gethsemane means? The Garden of Gethsemane. People say, have you had a Gethsemane? Oil press. It's the garden of the oil press. So the Bible never actually says Garden of Gethsemane. It says a garden, and one time it says Gethsemane, and so they would press the oil. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe how they pressed oil, I believe, on Wednesday night in the series, but they would press it 4 times. And the first time, extra virgin, that's for the temple. The next time they'd press it, that would be for food. Next time would be for light. Not much left on the 4th pressing, so they'd actually take that and use it for soap or ointment, right? So anyway, that's what we're burning is olive oil there. Some of you asked me a little bit about the tour thing. You were asking me some of that. There's a scan thing if you want to try and scan that. We'll try and get some brochures for one night. We try and keep all of our things a big secret. But Egypt is my favorite tour. You enjoyed last night? It was wonderful to go and enjoy. And oh my. I was telling Pastor Scott that in the old days, I used to do the dusty donkey tours for poor pastors. And one time we did not even have a reservation to go from Cairo to Luxor. So we had to take a first-class train seat, which meant that we got in the train, but the seats are actually reserved. So every time they would stop, they'd come shake you. You have to move to another seat. It's like a 10-hour train ride. So anyway, that was kind of the old days. And now, of course, we don't do that. We fly down to Luxor and Aswan, and we actually take the boat going back up. One night we were at Mount Sinai, and I told these group of pastors, said we're going to hike up to the top, and we'll rent these horse blankets, these camel blankets from the Bedouin, and we'll sleep up on the top of Mount Sinai. It's like 8,000 feet above sea level. It's cold. So we got up there, and I had a blanket, and a couple of my friends had a blanket. And I said to one friend, I said, look, I'll put my blanket down. We'll sleep under your blanket. I woke up the next morning, and I had the other pastors all hugging me and so on. We were all so cold. I said, I hope nobody has a camera. This doesn't look good. But anyway, we have a great tour and a great time in Egypt. So fabulous tales to tell tales. Now last night I just wanted to emphasize something I talked about. I talked a little bit about the monotheistic reaction of a pharaoh named Akhenaten, right? Does anybody remember who Akhenaten's wife was? Nefertari. And she happened to be, from of all places, Mesopotamia. Remember I talked about Sarah? No, I didn't talk about that. That was another story I told them yesterday morning. Sorry. Anyway, I won't go there. So Akhenaten. So anyway, Akhenaten was the monotheistic god in a reaction, I believe, to the Hebrews leaving and the Exodus taking place. And if you look at King Tut's chair here, can you see the sun in the middle? You see the sun disk? But it's not the sun disks of Amun-Ra. Can you see the sun rays going down? Now, if you have your binoculars, you might be able to see there's a hand at each of the ends of the sun rays. So while most of Egypt had worshipped Amun-Ra, and we have Ra often, you hear Ra all the time. Ramses is right, Ramses is Ramses, right? Ramosis. This is the Atan. And he rejected all the other gods of Egypt and worshipped one God, the Atan, as a reaction, I believe, to the Exodus. Now, what's very interesting, this guy's a pacifist. He leaves Luxor, where all the traditional gods and religions and sanctuaries are. And he goes to a new place called Armana. He invents a whole new style of art with his beautiful wife Nefertiti. And they live there, and things go very interestingly, but he's a pacifist. And if you follow Bible chronology, this is the time when the children of Israel are conquering the land of Canaan. And they're sending letters. It's a place called Armana. They're called the Armana letters. And there are Canaanite kings sending letters saying, can you please send somebody? There's some Habaru. Can't say they're Hebrew, but they're a roving band of people. The Habaru are invading our land. Can you please send some soldiers to protect us? How cool is that? He's a pacifist. He doesn't go. He doesn't respond. So they don't meet any resistance as they're going in from Egypt. Very interesting. Now, I told you last night that originally King Tut was Tut Ankh Atan, A-T-E-N, and you can see it right in his throne chair, right? After a while, the priests worked on him so hard, they got him to go back to worshiping Amun, so today we call him Tut Ankh, A-M-U-N, Amun, even though his throne chair has that very interesting display of the Atan from his father and how he had worshiped that as a child. Well, tonight we're going to go to Petra, and we're going to look at this fabulous city in southwestern Jordan. The title is called Fabulous Tales the Tell Tells. Now, what does that mean? Fabulous tales, stories, the tell. What does it tell? It's the mound, the archaeological ruins. Fabulous stories the mound tells us about. So kind of a little tongue twister, right? Fabulous tales. Well, let's begin. Petra, the rose-red city half as old as time. These words were immortalized by Dean Burgeon in his prize poem of 1845. Few sights have captured our imagination or excited our sense of wonder as much as the ancient Nabatean city carved out of rock in the desert of southwestern Jordan. It is just spectacular to see all of these different buildings and things. From the first time I heard of this unusual city, I had a deep desire to visit the ruins, reported to be the most spectacular on earth. So I went in 1986 for the very first time. And as I went, I was just struck dumb with these wonders. Thousands and thousands of buildings and monuments and tombs and dwellings and unusual mountains. It was first called Sela, which is a Semitic word that means rock. Later on, it got the Greek name Petra, which means the same. My first trip down, we had come into Amman, Jordan, and we drove down the desert highway. And there's only one port in the country of Jordan today at Aqaba. And Aqaba unloads the ships and all the stuff goes up the highway. Look at these cars. This car was loaded with goods, bound for Kuwait. You would think that the wind might actually blow it over, right? And occasionally you see more interesting cargo like this. Now, it only takes about 3 hours to go down the desert highway. It's so hot there, by the way, and the camel caravans don't go anywhere. It's the truck caravans, the semis, and they actually wear down ruts into the highway. It's the main highway of Jordan. Very interesting. I enjoy seeing the guys pulling over on the side, and they're actually cooking their tea on the side with their semi. I preferred going down the King's Highway. This is actually the King's Highway. It's mentioned in Scripture. Look at this. See the car going down? It's actually mentioned. Let me read it to you. It says, "Please let us pass through your country. We will not go through any field or vineyard or drink any water from any well." This is Moses asking his relatives. "We will travel along the King's Highway." What? "And not turn to the right or the left until we pass through your territory." It takes you about 8 hours to go that way versus 3 hours to go the other way, but it is just spectacular to drive down and see that scenery as you go down one side, go up the other side. Fabulous. Well, in 1986, my first stop was at Ain Musa. I had a couple of friends with me, and we went to this. Ain means spring, Musa is Moses, spring of Moses, where local tradition says that Moses struck this rock and water came out, causing it to gush forth. Actually, the Edomites, remember the Edomites are the children of Esau, the brother of Jacob, refused to allow Moses to go through their territory, and they had to take a long track around the land of Moab, Moab being the son and grandson of Lot, on their way to the land of promise. So this began a long and often bitter animosity between the children of Jacob and the children of Esau. Nonetheless, the spring and the wadi through which it flows were named after the prophet Moses, Ain Musa, or Wadi Musa. Now, back in those days, this was 1986, the local hotelier had it right next to that. He's still there. I saw him not long ago, a couple of years ago. He wanted us to use that. My wife wanted us to use that hotel. Now, in those days, today there are hundreds and hundreds of hotels. Plus, there's all the people that come off the cruise ships to go there. I mean, this is one of the most visited sites in the world. But in those days, it was like only one or two hotels. So come check out the hotel. We went in and checked it out, and my wife saw the toilet. It was a Turkish toilet. You know what a Turkish toilet is? It's got like a little hole there and little footprints on each side so you can squat. And you know where the shower was? Right above. She said, Tony, I can't take it. I can't do this. We have to go somewhere else. So the government rest house was here, actually in the tomb. So we slept in one of the tombs that night. Well, today there's hundreds and hundreds of options. We were up before sunrise because we were so excited to catch the golden rays gracing the surrounding mountains. Now the region, as you can see in this image, is a very, very barren. Some of the peaks are reaching 3,500 feet above the foothills below. And if you look closely, you'll see a little white building on top. Can you see it? That's the traditional tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses. And so it's called Mount Hor, and it's higher than all the others in the distance. Now it's very interesting. On the other side of that is the Araba. And when you're down on the Araba highway that the children of Israel had to go up to go around that area, you look up and you can actually see it on that side as well. Very, very thin mountain as it gets there. Here's el Birai. It's called the Mother of Cisterns. This was kind of the original place where the people were settling there in the land. And it was called Mother of Cisterns because of all the cisterns carved into the rock. So just imagine they're catching the water, they're having the cisterns. They learned a long time ago it's harder to throw rocks uphill than downhill. So if you're up on the top and you got water and you got food, you're pretty safe from anybody who's going to come, and they'll try and come and camp around and starve you to death, perhaps. This is called Mount Seir. This is where the children of Esau lived. Jeremiah described the favorable location in a prophecy and predicted its downfall. Here it is, Jeremiah 49, verse 16. You who live in the clefts of the rocks, who occupy the heights of the hill, though you build your nest as high as the eagles, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. Very interesting, because the people of Petra were no more. They came to an end. They disappeared. And we're going to look at that and see why. Well, the view was splendid, but we had not come to see the mountains. We had come to see the beautiful ruins of the Nabateans. And so instead of going back into town and taking the horses down the trail like a lot of tourists do, I convinced my wife to scale down the 300-foot cliffs to the wadi below. And they were coming down that, and she was quite a sport as we did that, and we deposited a lot of skin and blood on the rocks. But it just got us more excited to get down there and see what it was, right? Entrance into the city is obtained through a few narrow rock gorges called wadis, with a dry stream bed that only flows when the rains come. Over the millennia, the flash floods have carved these canyons through the sandstone mountains. Now, it does not rain for months and months on end, but it does rain about 12 inches in the wintertime. A number of years ago, there were a whole group of British tourists, about 20, killed in a flash flood. Now they've diverted the water so it doesn't necessarily go through there. But you can just kind of see this incredible walk as you go through. It's about 1.5 miles. It's called the Seek, and it is splendid. Here's one that's got a little bit more light on it. It winds for over 1.5 miles. The Arabs call the gorge the Seek, or the cliff. Nowhere is it wider than 60 feet, and most of the time it's only about 20 feet wide, with 160-foot perpendicular walls on each side. Now, when I first went there, we didn't see this. You see it right here? You know what that is? Aqueducts. To bring the water into the city. All this had been filled up with rubble 10, 15 feet above that. Now they've actually excavated all the way down to the Roman pavement that you'll see them walking on in this image. Here you can actually see part of that's Roman pavement, part of it's new pavement, but it's down to the Roman level. You see the aqueducts on the left as they're walking through that. You walk down, the light of the sun is basically blocked as you walk down that, twisting and turning. Now here I am up on the top, and you can actually see now down into the valley. So this Petra site was protected, only that one way to get in through the flat land, or you had to come over the mountains. So they learned a long time ago that a few soldiers could keep thousands of enemies at bay, right? So it was very, very protected, and you can kind of see the main artery going through Petra. You can see the monuments and the tombs and so on. Thousands of enemies could be kept at bay. After many twists and turns to the beautiful sandstone mountains, you come to an opening just 9 feet wide. I know of nothing to equal this sight of the rock-cut facade that confronts you. The brilliance of the sunshine upon the rock is just spectacular. I never tire of taking this trip and this journey and walking down and seeing that splendid monument carved out of the living rock. 9 feet wide, wow. It's called El Kesna, which means the treasury. It was carved in the Greek style from the living rock. The 2 stories of their Corinthian columns are over 90 feet tall. Beautiful. It was carved into the rock at a point secluded from the wind and rain, so it's really maintained its beauty and ornateness down through the centuries. Although some of it is suffered badly from human hands, the idea developed that there was a Pharaoh's treasury here, and that there was treasure in that little spot on the ornament on the top, so countless people, boom, boom, boom. And of course, there's nothing there, it's not a treasury at all, but they didn't know that. And so they actually had taken pot shots at it and so on. Well, what was it? The room inside is just smaller than this sanctuary, just kind of a rectangular closet, you might say. But you might recall there was a movie that was filmed here. Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, and that's what they had inside of it right there. Of course, it doesn't exist there, but they went into the building and then had all this stuff. Anyway, I thought you might like that a little, so I threw that slide in this afternoon. Now, in the past, you were able to go into it, and you could see the little room, but today you can't go into it because as they continued excavating down, they actually found graves. Can you see the little stone there? You might be able to see some fencing on top of it. They actually found the tombs. The tomb of King Aretas IV, who put Paul, or tried to keep Paul in the city of Damascus, right? So this is his territory. And here we'll kind of look down and see if we can get a little bit there. You can actually see how deep it would go down into it. So this is actually a monument for the king's tomb. Very interesting. Now, as I said, Petra was totally forgotten about, but David Roberts, after they first found it, he came through in 1839, and he painted this picture. Now, I can't really go back on my slides very easy, but you can see how high all the debris is, way up into the doorway, almost up to where the horses were on the side that we were looking at a moment ago. Probably 20 feet of debris had filled in, and as they dug down through the years, they recently found King Aretas' tomb. There's another little close-up, and you can just kind of see how much it had filled in. Well, let's take a look back at the Sikh. There you can see it's just 9 feet wide before we go through the rest of the journey through the city. Taking a look back at that, 9 feet wide, the cleft, or the Sikh. But now we want to wander on down through the valley. We're going to pass thousands of buildings carved into the rock. Some are tombs, some are dwellings, some are temples, some are dining rooms. Just spectacular and splendid. Some have eroded in time. Some are preserved with very good condition. Look how eroded that is. It kind of looks like the treasury a little bit, but it's all eroded, softer stone and exposed to the rain. And so we can just kind of enjoy going through and looking at many of these different things. Some of you talked to me about the architecture. You can see a lot of different architecture: Egyptian architecture, Greek architecture, Roman architecture, Mesopotamian architecture, all kind of put in there together. Now this is the urn tomb. It's very interesting because of the height of the 60-foot wide doorway, or the very big doorway, I should say, not 60 feet wide. But you go inside the urn tomb, and there was actually a 5th century church there. But very, very beautiful. So the Christians came and lived there. We're going to go to a site in a few minutes called Ed Dir, which means the monastery. You might remember from last night, it was Dir el Bahri, the Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. It's called the monastery because the Christians lived there, the Christian monks lived there. All these areas became totally Christian in the early centuries before the rise of Islam. Here's the Corinthian tomb. It looks a lot like the treasury, doesn't it, that we were looking at, but look how badly eroded it is. You can barely make it out. Now, above the city is another gigantic monument. This is Ed Dir, the monastery. It was not carved from a mountainside. It was fashioned by removing the mountain away. Look at that. Is that splendid or what? Now, you have to go up 1,000 steps to get to that. So some people don't take the time to go there. But I'm going to take Pastor Scott one day and we'll go and hike up there. He went and they didn't take him there. The size is enormous, as if it was, the doorway is over 30 feet high, as if it was to be used by a race of giants. Every inch was cut with the most exacting and careful detail. So I said it's called the Adir, the monastery, one of the most sacred shrines in the city. Now in the old days, we'd actually go up on the ornament there. It was for the brave or foolish. In my young years, I was foolish. So we go up there many, many times to do that. And it's kind of like a beautiful thing and a beautiful view. You can actually go and look and see all the way over across the Araba to the hills of Israel on the other side. Now in 2019, we were descending those 1,000-foot stairs and we're caught in a flash flood. And I can tell you the Bedouin were flipping out. They were grabbing tourists and running down to the bottom. You could see the little group that I had who was hiking with me, and I put them against the wall in there under the thing, and even my wife was saying, we got to go. They brought one, actually it was a group of pastors I had, and they had one fellow, he was taking him down. He was falling in the water. My wife said, we got to go. And I said, no, water's deeper down there. We stay up here. If we got to go anywhere, we go up, we don't go down. But it was quite exciting to have all the water going down and seeing that. Well, the temples are carved out of the solid rock here, and I just wanted to show you a few pictures of what the rocks are like. Look at those beautiful veins of blue and red, the different in the rock. Here's some more. Just spectacular. The Romans cut a theater. It seats about 3,000 people. You don't need a microphone there to be heard. Very, very beautiful. The Romans came and took over this at a certain point in time. Here we're going up the steep steps of the city to the ancient Acropolis where the high place was located. Another fabulous hike to do as you can go up, 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 and you get up to the high place and you find an altar. And here's the altar where both the blood of animals and we believe humans drained in sacrifice. Petra was a fabulous place. It was well watered, as we've seen. It was protected, and yet it was deserted and forgotten for over 1,000 years. It was thought to be a legendary city. Was it really true? Nobody knew because they had never seen it before. They were only reading about it from the records of the past. What happened? Were those stories the Greeks and Romans told about it were true, and how much you had to dismiss as legend had to be discarded? No one could say until a young Swiss explorer rediscovered it in 1812 for the West. His name was John Louis Burckhardt. He was exploring the Middle East on behalf of a learned British society. He disguised himself as an Arab. He was making his way from Damascus down to Cairo, a very dangerous undertaking in those days. As he proceeded down through modern Jordan, he began to hear stories from his guides and other visitors about some extraordinary ruins hidden away in a mountain fortress. Here is his diary. He said, the road from Shobak to Aqaba, which is tolerably good, lies to the east of Wadi Musa, and to have quitted it out of mere curiosity to see the wadi would have looked suspicious in the eyes of the Arabs. I therefore pretended to have made a vow to have slaughtered a goat in honor of Aaron, whose tomb I knew was situated at the extremity of the valley, and by this strategy I thought that I should have the means of seeing the valley on my way to the tomb. To this my guide had nothing to oppose. The dread of drawing on himself by resistance to the wrath of Aaron completely silenced him. Is that exciting or what? You know? Wow. So he finds a guy in the little town of LG, and that's where the spring is. And he hires him, and the guide takes a goat, and they take his gun, and they go in, and he starts going down through the area. They get part way down, and the guide says, look, you can see the tomb up on the hill over there. Just do your goat here. And he said, no, I got to get closer. I can't do that. So he declined, and they kept going. And first Westerner in over 1,000 years to see this. Can you imagine? Somehow, as he traversed the valley, he went over and started sketching some of these different places. The treasury, the Roman temple. And then as he went over to get one of them, the guide says, you're just you're a robber. Picked up his rifle. So he said, okay. So he sacrifices his goat, turns around, and goes back to the village of LG that evening. This is what he writes in his diary. It appears very probable that the ruins in Wadi Musa are those of ancient Petra, and it is remarkable that Eusebius says that the tomb of Aaron was shown near Petra. Eusebius was an early church father, the bishop of Caesarea, who wrote the ante and post-Nicene fathers around the time of Constantine. So he actually documented it, and he says, it's remarkable, just like he said. How cool is that? How could such a fantastic city as this be lost to the West for over 1,000 years? Well, originally it was settled by the Edomites. And so here I have Edom, right here at Petra. See another place called Basra up there, very interesting, Basra. And you can kind of see the Kingsway going up that way, and there in the middle is the Araba Highway going up. And you can also see Zor and some of the other places where we believe those locations would have been. So they were settled by the Edomites, and then they were overrun and replaced by the Arab Nabateans, who were descendants of Ishmael, the son of Abraham. The Nabateans made Petra a rich caravan city. Now their territory, as we saw, stretched from the Aqaba to Damascus. They controlled that strategic desert highway and the roads between Arabia and Egypt, as well as the Kingsway going to the Red Sea and Syria and over to the Mediterranean. The caravans were bringing frankincense. Frankincense cost more than gold. Came from trees in southern Arabia, down in Yemen. And they were bringing myrrh. Myrrh cost up to 8 times the price of gold, or the price of frankincense. And so they're bringing them. So at first, they were raiding the caravans. And then they said, well, why should we raid them? Why don't we charge them a toll? Why don't we service them? So they began servicing the caravans, and that's how they made their money. That's how they became so wealthy and built all these things that we have seen, right? So it's very interesting. How many camels do you think are in a caravan? How many? 100? 1,000? Typically 1,000, and often there'll be 10 caravans hooked together, so 10,000. Can you imagine having a service station to service 10,000 camels? Right? Now, they didn't actually take the camels down the little road we saw. There was a little Petra, and that's where all the camels would go, but the camel managers, the camel owners, the camel drivers would come into Petra, and as you walk down that wadi, there were all kinds of shrines for different gods from around the world. And they'd pay their tribute to their gods. They'd go in and they would eat and drink and whatever they wanted to do and so on, and then they'd continue on their way. That's how they made all their money. Well, what happened is this. Soon, the sea lanes around Africa opened, And you didn't need to do all that caravanning stuff anymore. And so it was all forgotten about in the 6th century, 7th century. Totally forgotten about. Until the inquiry of the archaeologist rediscovered it. And so this kind of fulfills another prophecy. This one happens to be from a book in the Bible called Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. Remember, this is Mount Seir. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home in the heights. You who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau. The Lord has spoken. By the way, some of you have been up to my table and you saw that I had a Herodian spear. King Herod's father is an Edomite. His mother is a Nabatean princess from Petra. He's not really Jewish. His father was forced to convert to Judaism, which is why Jewish people do not like Herod, or even the whole time of Herod, even though that's the most glorious period of the whole history of Jerusalem. Anyway, that's just... So the prophets predicted the downfall, and we can see that history reveals the fulfillment, and Petra disappeared for over 1,000 years. So archaeologists are busy quietly uncovering the past in ancient tombs and buried cities and finding all kinds of wonderful things. Now, archaeology is a recent science. It's not geology, the study of the rocks, or anthropology, the study of the development of man. It's a science that researches and studies artifacts and remains of human beings. And we kind of, in this series, are trying to look at biblical archaeology to understand the culture and life of people who lived in biblical times. Helena was the mother of Constantine the Great. And Helena became a Christian, and so she went to the Bible lands. She searched out the different places. She built churches. She built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Nativity. She built a church up on the Mount of Olives to honor Jesus and the prophecies of Jerusalem. Very interesting. She does that, and so people were going to Jerusalem to get spiritual blessings and salvation. Here's a very interesting picture in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built by Helena. Can you see the guy with the golden robe on? Can you see that? Can you see his hat? What kind of a Christian is he? Armenian, Mount Ararat. But notice to his left, there's an Orthodox priest standing there. He's actually Greek Orthodox. And to his right, there's a Latin priest standing there. So there's 6 different groups that control the church today. So they believe you could get salvation by making pilgrimages there. And so interest really kind of waned in Bible lands. But during the Reformation, they were studying their Bibles, and they're reading their Bibles, and they're singing hymns. And all of a sudden, they began to wonder, well, what are these places like? And so travelers started going there. And so they found the Jordan River. That's kind of cool, right? They went out and looked at the Sea of Galilee where Jesus did all of his miracles around Capernaum and all of that. And so they're really kind of getting into this. And so it starts stretching their minds to think about this. During the Renaissance, people started coming there because they're looking for treasures, much like the treasures I have here. They were looking for treasures to go into museums. And so they started going for that purpose, but they really weren't trying to study to understand the past. Napoleon invaded Egypt, as we said last night, at the end of the 18th century, and they discovered the Rosetta Stone. And soon everything opened up in Egypt, and people started going there now to understand this. Now, there's 1850, Edward Robinson is standing by the spring of Jericho. Jericho is considered to be the oldest village in the world. He's standing by that spring of Jericho. And if I'm here at the spring of Jericho, probably about where the exit sign is over there, there's a big hill. So I'm here, but I have no idea where the city was. This picture, you can actually see the city has been uncovered in the hill. They had no idea the cities were under the hills, you see. They didn't know how it all was working. In 1860, a tomb was excavated on the Mount of Olives. So they'd do their tombs, they'd do ossuaries, they put the bones in them for secondary burial. And they began going in there, but they were really trying to look for treasures to take back to the museums. Sir William Flinders Petrie is a remarkable person that went down. He kind of lost faith in the Bible, but he went down and he was trying to study the pyramids because he believed there were angles and measurements that could predict the future, right? So he went down and started doing that, but as he was there, he began seeing all these things kind of confirming what the Bible was saying. Painted pottery from the Greek period had been looked at for a long time, and they could actually learn how to make it in chronology. He realized that there was lots of unpainted pottery being found here, and he wondered, could we do the same thing? Could we get a sequence of events? Now, if you've been up to the table, I have a whole sequence of lamps here from the time of Abraham down through time, and they change, right? And so that's all based on what's on the screen now, as they began to try and develop a chronological order of these things. In 1890, he began to dig here at Tel El Hesi in modern Israel along the coast. And you can kind of just see as he's digging down, can you see over here on the right, can you see the mud bricks? He's going down. So a wadi, a dry riverbed, that when the rains would come, kind of cut through the area, and you could see some of this stuff, and you could see things like this, shards of pottery in the wall, right? What's that telling you? Somebody lived there at some point in time, right? They got broken and they got left there, right? And he kind of saw that, and he thought, So he started digging. This is like the first digging happening on an archaeological site. And so one of my professors had this wonderful line in his book, the humble potsherd, that's the shard of pottery, the rubbish on the ground of any excavated site was elevated to become the major implement in the archaeologist's hands in an attempt to pry open the vault of time. If you look carefully, you'll see rocks and mud, but you'll also see these potsherds. And so here we have the two ideas. Sequence dating, that is, that pottery can be in sequence coming down through the ages, and then stratigraphy. What does that mean? That means the people who lived here first lived down on the bottom. The people who followed lived up above them. So as you're going up, you're getting to closer to modern times. You go down, further away. Those are the two basic principles of archaeology: stratigraphy and sequence dating. Pierre Vincent comes along and he becomes a specialist in this pottery typology. So here's a slide of some of our lamps when we had little things for them to help you see how they would go down through time: Iron Age, 1, 2, Hellenistic, Roman, and so on. Now, sometimes they would take big pieces of pottery and maybe Staples was out of paper. So they would write on them. So they're called shards, pot shards, but when they write on them, they're called ostraca. So here's an interesting one for you. In ancient Greece, whenever they'd have a trial, they would give the jury a piece of pottery, broken piece of pottery, a shard, and they'd write guilty or not guilty. If you're guilty, what were you? Ostracized. I'm sorry. Yes, that's where they, yes, kind of cool. Well, why was the site chosen? Why do they still live in the same place? So let's just kind of look at this one. What do you need? Where do you get water? I told you about the oldest village in the world. Edward Robinson was standing by the spring of Jericho. What else? We talked about a river a minute ago, Jordan River. You gotta have a river, that's a great place. One night we're gonna talk about Beersheba, and Abraham dug a what? A well, right? And the Sea of Galilee. You have to have water. Every site doesn't have water, so you gotta have that. What else do you have to have? Well, you have to have defensive walls. As we said, they found out it's easier to throw rocks down than to throw rocks up. This is a very interesting, it's called Bet Shan, or Beit Shan. Up on the top is a little tree that they use for Jesus Christ Superstar, but actually Jonathan and Saul's bodies were hung on that wall. Interesting. But anyway, defensive walls. And then you want to have arable soil so you can go out and you can do your farming and come in during times of danger. And then, of course, you want to have who are the neighbors, the transportation places, and so on. So very few sites had all of those qualities. And so people began to live there, And maybe a famine comes and people die, and then they kind of reconstitute and they come back and they do that. Maybe an enemy comes and knocks their city down, or an earthquake, because it has all these qualities. They rebuild it, flatten it out, and rebuild it. So you see what's happening? Stratification. Now, how can you tell if it's a hill or an archaeological mound? Well, mounds are going to be conical in shape, right? And they're going to have visible building remains. You're walking around, you often see dressed stones from houses, or those stones that Petrie saw in Tel el-Hesi. Ancient traditions. The locals, often even in Arabic, the names are being reflected in Arabic about what these places are. And then everywhere you go, there will be potsherds on the ground. I used to live in New England, and I did some gardening, and you know what I grew every year? Some of you back from New England? Rocks. That's why I have all those gorgeous rock walls, right? They just kind of come to the surface. These things just kind of come to the surface, right? And so you know you're on a tell. So here we're wanting to look and see what can we learn from the sands of the past through archaeology. Well, here's a great line. There can be no doubt that archaeology has confirmed the substantial historicity of the Old Testament tradition. Nuzi is very interesting. It's in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, and they found a whole bunch of tablets there. And these tablets are curious. One actually talked about the rights of a barren woman. Sounds a little bit like Sarai, doesn't it? They found another one of a guy who sold his birthright for 3 sheep. Sounds a little bit like Esau with his mess of lentils, doesn't it? So we started hearing these kind of things and saying, wow, these stories we thought were so weird and odd, they're kind of being reflected by what's found on the store, what's found on the ground. So these old stories were being affirmed. In 1987, I went here to Syria to inspect the fabulous ruins of Tel Mardik that's in the picture. Now, this town was 150 acres. Pastor and I have been talking about Jericho, and he was a little disappointed to get to Jericho because Jericho is 6 acres. If you include everything, you could possibly include 8 or 9 acres. 150 acres, huge city, huge city. They found over 1,000 clay tablets in 1976 in this room. This is the palace. And then where I'm standing with a big beard in 1987, they found the royal archives of Ebla. They ultimately would find over 20,000 clay tablets, a new language they did not even know existed. The archaeologist said my impression was that I was looking at a sea of clay tablets. Isn't that exciting? The city was burned in 2350 BC, so it actually baked these tablets to stone-like hardness. They're going to be there. So I said over 20,000 clay tablets were discovered now. What's the big deal? Well, more than 30,000 people lived inside the city walls. Over 300,000 people around the city walls. They were not fighters, they were traders. And they found these trade records. Names like Hatzor, Lachish, Megiddo, Gaza, Salem, Jerusalem, right? In 1977, the linguist of this site, Professor Petinato, said they found bills of sale, you see it on the screen, to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, he also said they found names paralleling Abraham, Ishmael, Israel, Esau, and Eber, just like in the Bible. Now, this created a huge controversy. So, Professor Mathia is the archaeologist who's in charge. Petinato was the linguist on the site. And it was very interesting. I took a group of pastors there in maybe 1999, 2000, when the Assad father was still the ruler. And very interesting tour. I said, I want to take my group to Tel Mardik. And the young guide said, you don't want to go to Tel Mardik. I said, well, I want to go to Tel Mardik because this is kind of cool stuff. You know? No, you want to do the other thing. Finally, we get away from the bus driver and the minder, and he's able to explain to me what's going on. Syrians were terrified that Israel would use this stuff on the screen as an excuse to attack Syria and occupy it and claim it like they had the West Bank. Now here's a college graduate. I said, really? And then I realized what was going on. Professor Mathia said, no, they didn't find any of this. That guy's wrong. He still had access to excavate. Professor Patinato stuck with his story, and they did not allow him to come and excavate anymore in Syria. So sometimes politics overrules what we find in the site. Well, Albright is considered the father of biblical archaeology. He saw more and more biblical data coming in. In 1936, he wrote, Genesis 14 used to be considered as unhistorical. Now we're more modest. He rewrote this line in 1955, and he said, Genesis 14 can no longer be considered as unhistorical in view of the many confirmations of details which we owe to recent finds. We have to wonder, what would he say if he saw Ebla, if he saw many of these other things coming in? How would that be? How would that be? Well, in 1987, I went up to this place in Syria, in Turkey. It's called Bogus Kale, as you can see on the sign. In 1834, John Texier was looking for Tavium, the Roman city of Tavium. So he's exploring around in northern Turkey. Today is about an hour and a half drive out of Ankara. And he comes to this valley looking for that city of Tavium, and he stumbles upon a huge city with walls that were miles in length, larger than Athens at the height of its glory. What city is this, he thought. And then as he's walking around, he sees these interesting gates with like gods and animals and different things on them. He said, what is this? What is this? The guide took him over to this sanctuary at Yazilikali, about a mile away. And here in this sanctuary, he could see these people, looks like gods or soldiers, he couldn't really tell, marching across the land. Who and what? Because they found something that looked like hieroglyphs, but it wasn't hieroglyphs, it wasn't Latin, it wasn't Greek. What was it? Strange language. It was an embarrassment because they were finding more than was known to be lost. Okay. As a matter of fact, they found this writing all through Anatolia. Anatolia is modern Turkey. There you can kind of see modern Turkey by the circle. It's all through all of that down into the northern part of Syria. In 1880, Henry Sayce proposed that this was the Hittite kingdom. Oh, people laughed and joked. What are you, some squarehead Bible person? Hittites never existed. Hittites are in no Greek literature, they're in no Roman literature. They never existed. Even though the Bible mentioned 48 times the Hittites. One time it actually said the Hittites and the kingdom of the Egyptians. Put them in the same category. But there was no record of them in the Greek or Roman literature, so they said they never existed, right? Then came the Rosetta Stone. Now I have to chuckle to myself because we talked a little bit about Karnak last night. And this is Karnak. And here's Ramses the Great, and he's busting up the Hittites. All right? They couldn't read about it because he's busting up the Hittites, right? So in 1906, Winkler found, can you believe it, the first international peace treaty. Did that go too quick? Not sure I can go back, but I'll try. I'll just take my word for it. The first international peace treaty, okay? And it's between Ramses the Great and the king of the Hittites. But down in Karnak, this is what Ramses was saying. He was writing on his walls. I'm the fearless one. I put an end to the boastfulness of Haiti, the Hittites. I'm the son of Ra. I trampled the land of Haiti underfoot. So, all this time, people are believing that to be true. Today, we realize it's all shameless propaganda, and yet it was believed for over 3,000 years. Now, the interesting story is I have a wonderful Egyptologist. I love him like a brother. And we get down there, and he's so proud of Egypt, he starts waxing on about this panel. to our group, and I'm saying, remember, Max, you have me here. We know this is propaganda. What really happened is very interesting. As he was coming down to attack the area, or as he was going up into Syria to attack them, the Bedouin floated a story that they heard he was coming, and they got so afraid of him that they went back home, and they laid a trap. And they basically almost defeated him, captured his stuff. He barely escaped with his life. That's why he was willing to make a peace treaty. And yet, that story was believed for over 3,000 years on that tomb. Anyway, the Hittites were very interesting. They were near, almost like gentlemen. They really didn't kill a lot of their enemies and so on. They developed iron, by the way. And the archaeologist Spade confirms that story, even though they were not mentioned in Greek or Roman literature. So the Spade of the archaeologist has dug up in the remote past, confirming the biblical account of history by clay tablets and hidden manuscripts and stone cylinders and hieroglyphs. Here we can see one of those beautiful clay cylinders right here of the Cyrus cylinder. Again and again, we see the Bible is affirmed as a reliable document. Now, one more mystery I want to tell you about is that of Belshazzar. Here we have Babylon, and here we have a very interesting panel from the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. You can find this in the Ankara Museum and also in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. And notice it's a winged lion. Some of you like to study the book of Daniel, and there's a winged lion in there, right? It's a symbol of Babylon. That's it right there, right? And so, the problem is, the Bible talks about somebody living in Babylon when it fell to the Persians named Belshazzar. And there's no record of Belshazzar in any Greek or Roman literature. Not one line. They said, you're going to be a squarehead and believe that? He never existed. That's a Jewish myth, right? Then in 1861, the prayer of Nabonidus, whom they knew to be the ruler of Babylon when it fell from Greek and Roman literature, had a prayer for his oldest son, and he was named Belshazzar. And then the Nabonidus Chronicle comes along, and it tells us that Nabonidus was down in Arabia in Tema looking for butterflies and worshiping down there when Babylon fell. But they still didn't believe it because they said, it's still not calling him a king, you know. And then in 1924, Smith published the verse account in which Nabonidus says, I entrusted the kingship to my oldest son. Now just remember, no Greek, no Roman literature talking about any of this as it comes down through time. And so their dilemma is reflected in the words of Pfeiffer of Harvard University. Notice what he says. We shall presumably never know how our author learned that Belshazzar, mentioned only in the Babylonian records, in Daniel and in Baruch 1:1, which is based on Daniel, was functioning as king when Cyrus took Babylon. Well, we don't know how that could happen. You know how it happened? He lived when it happened. Daniel lived back at that time. Now, the whole problem is there are incredible prophecies in Daniel chapter 2 that foretell the future of humanity. And those prophecies are so specific that the scholars say, well, it couldn't have been written before. It had to be written after, like a poem afterward, you see? But the very fact that it talks about Belshazzar tells us that it actually was historical. So again, the Bible is historically vindicated, it's accurate. So here's another one from another quote on that. Of all non-Babylonian records dealing with the situation at the close of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the 5th chapter of Daniel ranks next to cuneiform literature in accuracy so far as outstanding events are concerned. Isn't that powerful? Wow. So again and again we see the Bible is true, but people wonder, like this fellow from Yale University, Frederick Kenyon, he wrote this in 1939. How well are we provided with manuscripts of the Hebrew Old Testament? It's generally rather a shock when one first learns that the oldest existent manuscripts are no earlier than the 9th century after Christ. You get the idea? At least 1,000 years separating from the time they were written until the earliest manuscripts we have. 1,000 years, right? So he waxes eloquent, he goes on. Over 1,000 years separate our earliest Hebrew manuscripts from the date at which the latest of the books contained in them was originally written. It's a disquieting thought when one reflects how much a text may be corrupted or mutilated in the course of transmission by the manuscripts over a long period of time. He's saying, you can't trust that Bible. It's been 1,000 years. Well, just think about all the stuff that might have happened to it during that time, right? When did he write that? 1939. Now, according to the story, the traditional story, I'm going to tell you the real story in a minute. The traditional story was that there were some Bedouin down in the Dead Sea, and they were looking for their lost sheep and goats 8 years later. And they thought maybe, and this is why it's kind of a weird story, maybe they had crawled up into that hole up there. Really? Anyway, so they took a rock and they threw it into there and boom, crashing pottery. Now, the traditional story is they were terrified because they thought it was evil spirits and they ran away, and then they got to their tent and they thinking, was it evil spirits or was it a vase of gold? And they got their courage back and they went back after that and they climbed up in there and they looked into, they found these urns, and they were so excited because they thought they had found gold. And when they opened it up inside, they found leather scrolls with writing on them. Okay? Right? And so they would ultimately find every references to every book or quotes from every book in the Hebrew scriptures except for Esther and is it Ruth? Skipping my mind right now. Anyway, they found they found the entire book of Isaiah. Now, this gentleman is the grandson of the man who bought the scrolls from the two Bedouin brothers. His name is Shibli. He has a little place in Bethlehem. I want you see that little urn there? Let me give you a better picture of it. There were 4 original urns found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? 2 are in the Israel Museum, the Shrine of the Book, one's at the Vatican, and one's in his shop. So I like to take groups when I'm there to go to his shop because you can actually get you can't take pictures in the Israel Museum of the Shrine of the Book of it, so we go there. Now, Shibli is an interesting character. He told a story to me that kind of blew my mind. He said, you know what really happened? My grandfather was paying tomb robbers to look for treasures. He says, you have them as shepherd boys, but you have cowboys. Are they children? No, right? He was paying them to look for these things. He found them, and they invented this whole story to keep it under wraps as to what had happened. I said, can I tell that story? He says, yeah, I'm doing a documentary on it. It's fine to tell that story. And so they were actually looking for these things. By the way, it turns out he was a Syrian Christian, Aramaic Christian. And the first one they found was actually part of Daniel, written in Aramaic, and so the grandfather could read it and knew what he had. That's why they kind of hid it away and so on. And ultimately, of course, it makes its way, and you know today is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in 1951, DeVoe and Harding began to dig at a place called Khirbet Qumran, which is right below where the scrolls were found. And they began to find that this was a group of Essenes, a very, very extreme religious group who rejected traditional Judaism and had moved down to the desert and were living in a monastic type of community. You can kind of see the steps there. That's like you got a baptistry over here, I see pastor. That's called a mikveh. And these guys would baptize themselves 2 or 3 times a day to be pure. Okay? Very interesting. But here they found this room, and at first they thought, is this a dining room? But then they found out it was called a scriptorium. And they actually found desks, much like this one, and ink in the wells, and the ink wells matched that on the scrolls. And so it was a group of Essenes who were actually copying the scriptures. When the war with the Romans had taken place, the Zealots fled from Jerusalem. They came down through here, went down to Masada. The Romans come down to wrap them up. And so the people living here left their scrolls in the cave and fled down to Masada, where they'd ultimately lose their life with the Zealots there on top of Masada. So here we find the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually hidden in the cave. Now, Miller Burroughs was the secretary of the Oriental Institute of the Middle East. He produced the first book on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I want to read you something very interesting from his book. He says, some readers may be disappointed that the translations of the Isaiah manuscript are not included in this edition of the text of the Dead Sea Scrolls, first one that's published. Well, I'm not putting Isaiah in here. Why? Well, he explains. The fact is that most of the differences between these manuscripts and the traditional Hebrew text do not involve changes of meaning that would be evident in a translation. And the differences that do involve such changes are not sufficiently frequent to justify the space for these translations of the text. He says you won't even notice the difference in an English translation. How much have they changed? Can you say? Oh, how much have they changed over time? Not enough to even see the difference in an English translation. Wow. These are over 1,000 years earlier than we had before, and they are the same. So tonight we're looking at fabulous tales to tell tales. We've gone from Petra to Iraq to Turkey to the Dead Sea, and it tells the same story that you can trust in the Bible. Indeed, the spade confirms the book. God has preserved his word in Scripture. It reminds me of this beautiful Bible verse from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 8. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever. Kind of almost reflects the words of John Greenleaf Whittier, that Quaker poet. We search the world for truth. We call the good, the pure, the beautiful, from graven stone and written scroll in all the old flower fields of the soul. And weary seeker of the best, we come back laden from our quest to find that all the sages said is in the book our mothers read. Let's pray together. Father, thank you this evening for the opportunity to be here in Tacoma and to share these wonderful things about the Bible and the confirmation and see wonderful sites like Petra and all the things we've seen. But we kind of hear coming down through time that the Word is true, the Scripture is true. I pray that you give each of us a confidence in this. We live in such a skeptical age when things are questioned, and we each have more confidence as we read that book to hear your voice and to follow, we pray. In the name of Jesus our Lord, amen. Well, Tuesday night, the Jew, the Arab, and Jerusalem. We'll go to Jerusalem. This is where the Temple Mount was. That's not a temple, that's a Muslim shrine. It's not a mosque. There's a mosque off to the left, okay? But it's a Muslim shrine. The Dome of the Rock, they believe that Muhammad came here in a night vision, a dream, and went to heaven from a rock. Well, that's kind of interesting. It became the holiest place in the Muslim world at one point. Today it's the third holiest place in the Muslim world. But that is the Temple Mount area, and we'll explore all about Jerusalem, the ins and outs of that. And then on Wednesday night, tracing the footsteps of Jesus, we'll go down to the Sea of Galilee, we'll explore all these wonderful things. And then Thursday night, when Iraq ruled the world, we'll get into a lot of that as well. So we got some good things coming up. Hope you can join us. Pastor Scott, I'll give you the time. Sorry.
How about if we do this? Can we have like a 10-minute question answer, just real quick?
Sure.
Is that all right? You guys want to ask a few questions or something? So 10 minutes, because some people have to get up early in the morning. We have some truck drivers in here that get up early in the morning. So who would like to be the first one to ask a question? Anybody want to ask a question? Okay, so let me do this. Mr. Gilbert, how about this? Gilbert is the guy in the red vest, or the orange vest, not a red vest. So how about if you give this, I'm going to let you, so I saw a hand over here. So we'll just do this real quick.
Was Pharaoh killed in the when the Israelites parted the Red Sea? Was he killed with the rest of them? And if he was killed, who took over after him?
I thought I'd get caught on that. You're very perceptive. Who did I suggest last night was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Amenhotep II, the son of Tutmosis III. For many, many years, I used to teach that Tutmosis III was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, but he dies in 1450 BC. And so we now know the Exodus is 1446 BC, according to the Bible. So the question becomes, does he drown? Now, I've been very surprised to see that Scripture doesn't actually say Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea. And so I'm of the belief right now that he did not drown in the Red Sea. My mentor, William Shea, that I did a lot of archaeological work and cut my teeth with, he wrote a very interesting paper where he proposed there's Amenhotep II A and B. And then he drowned and they got somebody else to be B and so on. But actually, if you look at very closely, the Bible doesn't actually say Pharaoh himself drowned, but his armies drowned. He was commanding the armies. So that's the position I'm at this point. And that is wonderful because it allows Tutmosis IV, who made that stele we looked at, to be actually the Pharaoh whose older brother had died in the 10th plague. Very good question.
Anybody else? Another question?
I got one, Pastor.
Okay.
I was just curious. You said that one of the vessels was at the Vatican. And does it still hold the scrolls in there?
I'm sorry, I missed the very first part.
The vessels that were found in the cave.
Oh, okay.
You said one was at the Vatican.
Yes.
And are the scrolls still in there?
No.
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 So it's just the vessel itself.
All of the scrolls were removed. They've now found hundreds and hundreds of fragments in about 18 different caves. So the 4 main ones that were found in there, that's where the clay urn is. Did I lose my mic? Yeah. No. That's where the clay vessels are. No, they're not in there anymore. They're in the Israel Museum, and you can't really take pictures of them. It's very hard to access any of them and so on. And they don't really keep them on display. They're trying to do their best to preserve them as much as they can. They're still working on them. But of course, today there was a guy who was in charge of Biblical Archeology Review, Herschel Shanks. He actually made copies of it and spread it out so everybody could have it. Before it was scholars, and you wanted to work with a scholar because you'd have access to that and so on. And now it's just universally available everywhere. But yes, they're still working on it.
Go ahead, Steph.
I understand that Jericho was destroyed. God destroyed Jericho. When was it actually built?
It's done.
When was Jericho built?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I understand Jericho was destroyed according to the Bible. It was rebuilt. How many times was it rebuilt?
Okay. Jericho is considered to be the oldest village in the world. It's got a spring. It's usually about 100 degrees down there. When I spend months in Jerusalem at a time, we shop down there. They got the best potatoes in the whole world, even better than Idaho potatoes. And fruits and vegetables, you know, it's very, very bountiful. So it was Old Testament Jericho. In Old Testament, can I answer the, can I just tell you a little bit more about it as well? I'll come to your question as well. Very small. The main part is 6 acres. It was a hill. And when you go there today, it's very confusing. I was telling Pastor even as we were picking me up on Friday, very confusing because all the signs say very, very different things that don't fit with the Bible. There's a cyclopedic wall around it. It's like huge rocks, maybe 4 or 5 feet high. They go up 25 feet. They're like a belt around the hill. Then they built 15-foot high mud brick walls. So the first person to excavate was named Garstang, German guy, and he excavated, and you know what he found? He found places where those not the stone walls down here, but the mud brick walls on the top had fallen out like that. He found grain that had been burned, still there. Why would you capture a city and burn the grain? The Bible says that's what they did. The Bible says the Israelites ran straight into the city when the walls fell. Now, I've taken people there through the years, and I see that stone wall, and I say, oh, man, walls are still there. So you have to understand the whole history of that. Now, it gets a little complicated, and I don't know if you're asking this question because of this. Kathleen Kenyon, her family was part of the Leakey family that did Lucy and all of that in Kenya. She excavates there. And she's really, really anti-Zionist, very anti-Jewish. And so she says, yep, found the walls, they fell like that. Yep, found the grain. It happened, but it happened in 1550 BC instead of in 1400 BC, 150 years early. And nobody was living there because it really wasn't rebuilt. It was rebuilt for just a hair, but not really rebuilt at all. They abandoned it and went somewhere else. Now, when I first went, I did a 5-week course with Dr. Shea in Jerusalem in 1986. And Bryant Wood had just done his PhD in Egyptian pottery typology of the 14th century. And so he reviewed everything that had been found from the documents of Garstang and Kathleen Kenyon, and guess what he finds? He finds Egyptian pottery from 1400 BC, telling us that they were actually there. So I believe, based on that, It was destroyed in 1400 BC. Now, there's a very short time when a guy goes there, but it's never really occupied after that. They moved to other places in the same area. But Old Testament Jericho comes pretty much to an end at that point.
So, one last question, and I'll let you get go. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, Psalm 146, verse 10, it says, but overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea, for his mercy endureth forever. Overthrow, so I don't know if you can explain that. When he said Pharaoh and his host was overthrown.
You're in the Psalms?
Yes, Psalms 136, verse 10.
Yeah, the word overthrown.
15, sorry.
Yeah, the word overthrown is actually shaken like a garment. When you have a bug on your garment, when you see the same Hebrew word in other places, it's shaken like that. So he's thrown off like that. And but it's very interesting, in Exodus it doesn't say that he drowns, and in the other passage in Psalm it doesn't say he drowns. That one with the overthrown is a little bit more tricky but it actually is the overthrown, like shaking off your garments, which is what I would believe. But I understand if people want to disagree with me on that. I only came to this conclusion in the last year, by the way, on that aspect of him not drowning. Yeah. So if you came to my meetings in Puyallup a couple of years ago, your thing will probably say something different about Moses III being the Pharaoh of the Exodus. But I have to go with what the facts are.
Okay, very good. So when's our next meeting? Tuesday night. Okay, so here is our little drawing.
Okay?
So you want to pick one out?
I can, but I can't read.
Well, I'll read it.
Oh,
Only
that's
get one
two.
of them.
Okay.
Okay, so here is our winner. Our winner is Stefan Crawford. That's you.
Wow.
Hey, that's good. So whatever you're giving, I'm not sure what you're getting, but come on up here. You get something. So what is he? What is he?
This is a Roman era lamp. I'm sorry I don't have a nice container for it. The one nice container I had broke on the way up here.
Thank you so much.
But that's a Roman era lamp, about 3rd century AD. And you can burn it if you want, or you can just put it on the mantle. I suggest putting it on the mantle.
Anyway, hey, congratulations.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay,
And there's more. We'll have one every night.
every night. Okay, sounds good. So if you would like for some refreshments, you're more than welcome to get some refreshment. So again, thank you for coming. We'll see you on Tuesday night on Israel. That's where we're going to be going on. Jerusalem, okay.
Jerusalem.
Very good. Anyway, good night. If you want to look at some more of the artifacts, you're more than welcome to do that too.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Welcome.
Thank you again for this evening.
Oh, thank you. He's got me on.